when you take the leap, you are taking a leap of faith. But one of the major things is that you're not taking a leap of faith based on the fact that you're guaranteed success. You're taking a leap of faith based on the fact that you're going to try a whole bunch of things, and so you kind of have to be open to the idea of failure.
Welcome to this episode of The Gathering. In this episode, we talk about a really, really important topic, especially to ambitious and smart millennials, which is how do you understand your ambition as it intertwines with your faith in your life? Is there a difference? Isn't Christianity just another form of self-help? I'm really looking forward to this episode because we've got Carl joining us, who made the transition to being an entrepreneur just over a year ago. I hope this episode inspires you and makes you start to think of some changes or things that you might need to explore in your own life. All the questions are a mix of what has been on my mind lately based on conversations with all of you and some of the questions that you have submitted in the link below. Today we are joined by Carl. I'm not going to do an introduction though, it'll be good to hear it from you. Who are you? What do you do exactly?
Awesome, man. First and foremost, thank you for having me so much, man. I've been really excited about this for the whole week. So my name is Carl Konadu. I'm a motivational speaker, entrepreneur. I run a social enterprise that goes into schools and delivers motivational talks, workshops for young people, because kind of going through the education system is cool that you get to learn Shakespeare, but what's really important alongside that is the idea that you need to learn how to deal with failure, build your confidence, the personal development type stuff. And the motivational speaking has just been a passion of mine from when I used to play like semi-pro football all the way through to doing volunteering, etc. So I produced daily motivational kind of videos and content online as well, so check me out.
Great, brilliant. So I'm really happy to have you, as I said.
Thank you.
And what we're doing today is the topic we're going to talk about is ambition, work, and how that intersects with our faith, with our Christianity, with God at large, right? Because I think in this day and age, everybody's building something, everyone's working towards something, and I think that's important. I don't necessarily think that it's out of line with anyone's faith, but I do think there is a way to do it that will edify you and strengthen you and not kind of burn you out or take you down the wrong path. So I thought it would be interesting to have someone who does what you do and believes what you believe to start to address those issues.
Amazing, man.
So to start off, it's always good to get a bit of a background about how people actually got to where they are in terms of their faith and their Christianity, because so many people, like I personally grew up in a Christian home, but discovered it for myself. So just tell us your journey.
Cool, man. Similar to yourself, I guess. I grew up in a Christian home. I was brought up as a Methodist, and all I remember about going to church every Sunday was that it was really boring.
Yeah.
The hymns were boring, the service was boring, there was no oomph, there was no vim from the pastor. I quickly kind of fell out of love with it, and when football took over every Sunday, I just decided to go to football, and then you go to uni and kind of just fall out of the mix of it all. But I actually only recently got back into the faith, so I got saved last year. December the 17th.
Oh wow.
So it was
congratulations
really,
then.
thank you.
It's still not been a year, so hopefully I can still say that.
And I was baptized in February, but there were quite a few things that triggered me coming back to the faith and moving. But I remember specifically the day that I went to church, and so running this business, we had gone through a really, really quiet period. So we had no bookings, we had probably about 2 months of reserves left, and I was really stressed. And I'm not someone who gets stressed, I'm usually very bubbly, very excited. But I started to feel the anxiety, and I used to wake up every morning and feel the anxiety on my chest. And my little cousin, who really turned his life around and went back to church and got saved, seeing him do that, it inspired me, but it also made me question a lot of things. I was just a bit confused as to why, but I knew there was something inside me that wanted to know more. My twin sister had recently done the same, and so there were people around me that it was not necessarily happening to, but God was calling on. And I feel like God started to speak to me through various people. They started inviting me to church services, inviting me to sell, just speaking to me about life, and obviously God will kind of play a centerpiece in that. So one day I went to church, and the pastor said, come up to the front if you feel like there's a burden on you. And I remember before I went to church that day, I remember saying to myself, I feel this heavy, I just feel like I'm carrying the world on my shoulders. Let me go to church and see what happens. I really didn't want to go, but I was like, just fight it, let's see what happens. And he called, and when we got to the front, he just said, talk to God, just talk and see what happens.
Yeah.
And so I kind of started talking to God about, why am I going through all this stress? Why am I going through all this pressure? And I heard such a succinct and clear response that was just to say, the reason why is because you're trying to do this all by yourself. You are not, you didn't make this world. You're not supposed to carry all this pressure. You're not supposed to carry the world on your shoulders. Let go and let me do that part, and you just live out your life. And that was so powerful for me. And I just went to my little cousin Diani and I said, look, I'm ready, man. I'm ready to get saved. And he prayed for me. We went to the pastor. And yeah, here we are today, man. But it was such a powerful and clear moment that I said, yeah, this is right and this is meant to be. And that's not to say that obviously the journey's been easy. If anything, it's been more difficult. But yeah, that really keeps me going.
That is amazing. And there's so many themes in that, like you touched on, like carrying the world on your shoulders, anxiety, like kind of being out of the faith and coming back to it and feeling like everything was kind of aligning to get you there. So now that you're, I suppose, like back, what are the major misconceptions that you maybe had before, or like something that you believed about Christianity, God, Jesus, that in this journey now you realise actually that's not necessarily true, and I've had to shift my thinking, or something showed you already and helped you shift your thinking?
Yeah, totally, man. There's quite a few different things, but I guess one of the main ones was the idea that sometimes when you're from the outside looking in, you deem Christians to be perfect. And not necessarily because of anything that they've done, but because when you're from the outside looking in, because all you see is rules and all you see is conformity, and so you just assume that, you know, in order to be in the faith, you actually have to be perfect. And because you're not perfect, that actually results in you not coming back to the faith, or not relying on God, or not having faith. And so one of the first things that I realized is that faith and this journey is actually more about progression than it is about perfection.
Yeah, that's great.
There's
progression
nothing,
more than perfection.
Totally, man, totally. And yeah, I think we've even had a discussion about it before, but just the idea that it's about gradual steps on a day-to-day basis. And when God calls you, he doesn't call you because of the fact that you are perfect. He calls you because he wants you to just show progress. He wants to lift you up, and he has this journey for you. I always say to people that imagine if you were kind of going to a destination, driving in a car, and you had a sat-nav that was showing you how to get there, and you were using the sat-nav, but compared to the sat-nav, it can get you there. There's somebody that can see the road, they can see the road after that, they can see all the buildings, they can see all the traffic, they can see the whole world and tell you how to get there. That's what it's like being plugged into God. And so, yeah, for me, that is probably one of the strongest things around that idea. It's not trying to be perfect, but just constantly making progress.
Amazing. Yeah, that is great. Thank you so much. Wow, okay, there's a lot to like think about. So I think that's really insightful, and you've actually kind of touched on the first question that I had, and that we've been getting people to submit questions. I've been weaving that in based on what I understand of the different people who are going to be part of this journey. And the first thing that I really asked was about, what are your major challenges, like navigating life as an entrepreneur, and I guess that could be like either making the transition, or that could be the highs and the lows. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting how the first thing that you said of how you came to God was like after that quiet period. So I don't know if there's anything else to add, or any other observations outside of that particular time as an entrepreneur, but just talk to me a bit about actually navigating that from somebody who was employed to self-employed, essentially. Yeah,
totally, man. There's loads. The truth is, there's always loads. The entrepreneurship journey is pretty crazy, but I've been full-time self-employed for about a year now, and what I've realised is, like you said, there are always ups and downs, and when you take the leap, you are taking a leap of faith. But one of the major things is that you're not taking a leap of faith based on the fact that you're guaranteed success. You're taking a leap of faith based on the fact that you're going to try a whole bunch of things, and so you kind of have to be open to the idea of failure. And so one of the main things is just the idea of persistence and changing your view of failure. When I look back on some of the stuff that we've done in the past, it makes me cringe how bad it was. But had we not done that, we wouldn't be where we are today. And so you have to be prepared to do things and not necessarily do them that well, but learn from them and move on and push on. So that's probably one of the major things. And the other thing as well is, what I realize is that you quickly become, I'm a very big optimist, and you actually become quite cynical. Because what happens is when you start to do things and they don't necessarily go well, you start to base your opinions based on the things that didn't work. And that could be really dangerous. And so what I started to realise is that you become quite cynical. So it's so important to stay in touch with that fluffy, you know, excited part of you that just has ideas and wants to do them. You know, stay in touch with that part, because before you know it, you'll be saying no to every idea and every new thing because you just be scared of failure. You don't want that feeling again. And so, yeah, there's just a couple of reflections. There's probably loads more. But
that's great, because I think the two things that I got from that, and just thinking about my own experiences, risks that I've taken, is like starting with the latter thing that you said, which is you want to keep part of that like fluffy, excited self. And the first thing you said when you said that, the first thing that came to my mind was how it says in the Bible, you want to be like little children who are so innocent and haven't had the experience that leads to cynicism.
True.
And I think that's such a key point. And then the second thing was about actually making the leap without guaranteed success. So I suppose my question and a reflection from my own life is then, what is the leap based on then? If the leap is not based on success, what is it based on for you? And I guess before you answer that, my experience and my observation is that when I believe in risks and when I take risks, or what people may define as a risk, is because, one, I know what is being said to me in my own heart that I need to try and listen to. So it's like, you know, the Holy Spirit, and yes, okay, fine, I've had this feeling and it's the Holy Spirit, I just jump at it. Not necessarily. You reflect on it and you pray about it, and then if it's still there, what I've noticed is if I ignore something and it's still there, then maybe I should take the jump. And the jump isn't based on literally what you said, which is not based on success. It's based on the fact that if you believe the truth that God is there for you, will provide for you, will care for you, whatever that means to you, then you kind of got nothing to lose.
Exactly.
And like there's this amazing part of, I think, Psalm 62, which I try to say every day now, which is, it says in the Passion Translation, there's no risk of failure with God, so why would I be overwhelmed by worry?
Wow.
Or something like that. And it's amazing, like seeing that in clear black and white. You just have to say it to yourself over and over again, because there's so many things to worry about that you're like, there's no risk of failure. And then other things that like Jesus said like later in the Bible, and what I'll try and do after these videos is link all the passages below. Is like when God says, you know, I'm not asking that you take them out of the world, I'm asking that you protect them. And I think that's key. It's not that you become Christian and you become perfect, or your life becomes perfect. It's that you're protected in a way that maybe you weren't before, or you have knowledge of that protection, because I kind of believe that maybe everyone is protected, but it's about whether you embrace it, whether you acknowledge it, and whether you live within that.
Yeah, one of the powerful things that I heard Miles Monroe say was that God hasn't asked you to do anything that he hasn't already ordained. That he hasn't already brought to life. So God's not going to ask you to do something that he hasn't already written for your life. So, and going back to what you're talking about with regards to stepping out in faith, your stepping out in faith is actually a reflection on how much you believe and how much faith you have in God and him to protect your journey. So I think that's really, really powerful. There's quite a few different things, but I guess what I've learned over time is the more faith you have, it doesn't necessarily become easier, but you stepping out actually becomes a fuel for your own faith. So it's not a case of like, I have this idea and I have this vision and I need to go and build up my faith so I can do it. But you taking that step actually fuels your faith, because whenever you take that step, you look back and you say, hey, I'm actually a lot stronger than I thought I was. I can actually do a lot more than I thought I could. So yeah, that actually fuels your faith. And when you start to realize that, you will step out in faith even more, knowing that God is pushing you towards something. And yeah, he has a bigger vision for you.
Yeah, that's really critical actually, because so many people say, well, how do I know it's God? How do I know? Like, how do I know? And the answer, I really personally believe the answer is you literally just try. And I believe like if you're after God and if you're in the faith, your conviction, your heart, your spirit tells you. So it's actually like every small thing is every small opportunity to try and experiment directs you in your steps is key. And yeah, I completely believe that.
100%. On what you were saying before about how do you know whether it's God or not, there was a great book. There's a few different books. I'll maybe send the link and maybe you can put them in. But one of them by a guy called Joseph Boydu, who's actually my pastor, was around kind of learning how to hear from God. And he talked about sometimes when you get that voice, even if it is really clear, there's a few different things you can do to validate. So one of them you said was taking the small steps to see. Obviously, continue praying on it, continue to see, ask God why. Ask God, why have you asked me to do this thing? Why do you feel like I shouldn't do this thing? Why, etc. Write things down as well. Visions are really, really powerful. Sometimes God speaks to people through different ways. I've noticed that sometimes he will speak to me through people. So he'll send certain people into my life, or he will have a really, really clear voice in my head, and I'll literally be having that conversation with God. But sometimes it's really powerful to, if you get a vision, just write it down and then start reflecting on that, and then obviously speak to your elders, your pastor, speak to counsel. I can't remember the scripture, but it talks about the importance of kind of seeking wise counsel. And there's a few different ways how you can justify or validate whether you're hearing from God or not. So if you try and mix in those different techniques, it's always really helpful.
Yeah, that's so true, and I think it's just key how you highlighted that, like, hearing from God is not me hearing a voice in my sleep, or me, having a conversation with a voice that I can hear. Sometimes it's, like you said, about your thoughts.
Yeah.
And there are some thoughts you have, and this isn't from me. And you then get that and you validate whether it's from God, because there's so many thoughts, especially with the media and all the things we're feeding. We think our thoughts are our own, but they're actually a product of everything we've digested. So that's critical. So the next thing that I was thinking about is, like you kind of said, before you would define yourself as a performance coach, but now you kind of like moved away from that area. And one thing that I have observed sometimes, and I hear other people ask as well, is that isn't Christianity just another form of self-help? That if I read enough self-help books, is that the same thing? Aren't pastors just motivational speakers because they're really good orators? And I think it's important to be a good speaker, because you've got you need to communicate, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But kind of, what's your view on that? Because this is your field, and where is there a line? Where is the line? What does that look like to you?
There is a humongous, massive line. Massive line. And I say that because I was one of the people before who had that misconception that the Bible is just another form of personal development. So, I can take bits and pieces and I'll be cool. And it's totally, that's probably been one of the most powerful learning experiences that I've had since I've come back to the faith, because what I realized is that the whole personal development and self-help industry actually teaches you to rely on self.
Exactly.
That is probably one of the main motivations, and the reason why I realized this is because when I look back at a lot of the content I was putting out, that's what I was doing. And as soon as I got saved and I got baptized, it started to feel funny to talk in that way, because it was like, this doesn't fit with my heart anymore, and it actually doesn't fit with the message that the Bible is actually trying to teach. And during our Easter service, my pastor came and he gave a message, and it was so powerful around the idea that in the Bible it actually says Jesus tells his disciples to actually put down themselves or to kill, to die, for them to die.
Like lay down your life, take up
take up the cross and take up. And so it's the idea that you actually go from relying on self to being more reliant on God, and that is the main misconception, and that is the main difference, because you've only got a certain amount of fuel. You know what I mean? You've only got a certain amount to keep you going.
You've only got a certain amount of fuel.
Exactly.
Hallelujah.
It's so true. And so when you only rely on self, and the funny thing is, relying on self can actually get you quite far. And that's why it can be quite confusing, because if you can get quite far with yourself, and some people do it, they take the principles of the Bible and they use it and they frame it around just personal development or just self-help, and they can get quite far with it. On the flip side though, what is happening with regards to your faith is that you're staying plugged into the original source, and that is unlimited power. That is like it doesn't. I wrote down, I was praying yesterday and actually had a vision, and I wrote down the idea that you can, we all have, a lot of people have iPhones, and you can go and buy like a charger that isn't from Apple, but you can go buy from like East Street Market or something and plug into your phone, and it will charge your phone, but it will actually be decreasing the battery.
So actually,
the power of the battery.
So what you find is like your phone then
exactly, and it's like, because it's inauthentic, it's not the actual. But on the flip side, if you get an authentic Apple charger, what it's doing is it's charging your phone, but it's also then powering up the battery, the original maker, the source.
It's maintaining its integrity of the battery.
Exactly. And that's like when we are feeding on things that aren't from God. We might be charging up our phone and we get excited and we get inspired. And it's so contradictory as a motivational speaker to sit here and say this. But that's where the kind of tension lies, versus when you're getting the word of God and your true life and your true spirit, which is not just powering you up to be inspired, but is also increasing your battery, increasing your lifespan. And so that was probably one of the main differences, and that for me has been the most difficult transition, because I remember one of my mentors said it really early on, just the idea that when you are caught by God, it's like when you catch a fish, before you can cook the fish, you have to descale it. And that process is difficult. If you imagine someone got a grater and started rubbing it against your skin, that feels really difficult, and that's why the tension has come now. And that's something I battle with all the time, just the idea of you can't rely on self. It's now time to start relying on God, which is the most powerful thing. But if you spent 26 years relying on self, it's difficult to make that transition. And so there's definitely a misconception. There's a massive line though, but staying plugged into the source is going to keep you going for good. Just getting day-to-day motivation is totally different.
So I completely agree with that, and I think that's so insightful. How do you maintain the integrity of the battery? Like, okay, you read your Bible, you're building a business, you've got business self-help, which is also valuable. It's not that it's like irrelevant, it's just about when it needs something else. So how do you channel that strength of God? Like, what does that actually look like? Because I think the difficult thing about religion in general is that you can't see it, you can't necessarily touch it, you can't feel it, you can't smell it. So when you say, you're getting powered up, how? Yeah,
totally. So what I've found, and in my personal kind of journey, and I'm still learning this and still growing into it, but is that the importance of prayer is so powerful. And I know for some people that's going to sound very theoretical, because if you're not necessarily religious, it's difficult to get that. But even if you aren't religious, what I've found is everybody can understand and actually relate to the spiritual side of themselves. And you find a lot of people taking it up regardless of what you believe. And so over time, the more conversations you have with God, you realize that he speaks back and he actually only wants good for you. So prayer is obviously massively important to that. Obviously reading the scripture. What I did find as well is that with a lot of personal development and self-help books, there'll be things that I read in those, I'm reading in the Bible and I'm like, wait, hold on, this principle here, they used it over there. This principle here, they used it over there. And I'll never forget the day that I was talking to one of my friend's mums, and I think she's a Christian, she's very religious, and he started wavering, and he's not a Christian actually, but he started reading like the Quran, the Torah. He just said he wanted to get an understanding of other books. And I remember his mum said to us, she said, look, it's great that you all read other books and do all this wider reading, but the most important personal development and self-help book that you're ever going to read is the Bible. And at the time, I remember brushing off like, nah, whatever. These days, when I pick up the Bible, I'm like, nah. How did she know? It's crazy. Like, so everything that you can think of, from the power of now to the 48 laws of power to
attraction,
all of those books,
speak it into existence,
all of that.
Have a vision, write down your vision.
Habakkuk 2, verse 2, I think it is.
All that kind of stuff. Like, even just the things of like, just even the power of like what people would call your network, which are your relationships in the Bible. Like, it's all there. And I think that's been a really exciting thing in my life, is not just in the context of personal development, but in everything, is that every time I read the Bible, I'm like, wait, this is it.
Exactly.
Because all you think when you're growing up, or if you're not that close to the word, is that it's literally just rules of what you shouldn't do and why you're bad and why you're evil. And actually, when you read it, it's like, this is the key to life.
Exactly.
So I don't know how else to explain it.
It's true. But I think people have to actually go and see it for themselves in order to get it, and obviously be engaged with platforms like this. And this is why this is actually really important, because this isn't necessarily about continuing to kind of support and motivate just people who are already in the faith, but other people from outside the faith might be able to watch this and take something with it, man.
Yeah, that's great, because it leads me into kind of my next like overall question, which is, and you touched on it actually, you said something really good, which is everyone has some sort of spiritual like inkling. There's something in all of us, I believe, that is like, there's something happening that I can't necessarily see, and for some of us that looks like pursuing religion, some of us that looks like more questions. What would you say to someone who knows that question is happening, but doesn't really know what to do with it.
Cool. I remember being in that position myself, and I was quite blessed to have people around me that could direct me to the source. So it wasn't a case of this is what the right thing to do is, this is what the wrong thing to do. It was a case of, okay, cool, if you've got those questions, ask me. I'll tell you what I know from my perspective, and then this is where you can go and find out more. So they'd invite me to their cell groups, they invite me to church. But one of the things is that I realised is because everybody has that inkling inside of them, I always ask them to speak to God. Because I always say, if you're already having that spiritual feeling and you're breaking it down, and you know it's not something that, you know, we might be able to have in conversation, but there's a higher power, tap into that a little bit more. Like, ask those questions, spend a little bit of time praying, spend a little bit of time meditating, just tap into it a little bit more, and before you know it, that curiosity will actually lead to you finding things out, and before you know it, they're coming back to you. I'll never forget the time when one of my friends who is like, on the complete opposite side of kind of the tracks in terms of what he's doing with his life, etc. As soon as I got baptized, we had a conversation and we were talking about religion, and he came to me with all of these questions. I didn't necessarily know how to answer them, but I remember saying to him, look, a lot of the stuff you are talking about is because there's a calling on you right now to delve into this stuff, to ask those questions. So like, just go away and continue doing that. Even if you don't necessarily want to read the Bible, every time you have a question, call me, like, let's talk, etc., etc. Before I got home from our meeting, he called me again. But what about this? But what about that? And I'm like, okay, cool. God is clearly working on this person. So it's just a case of not necessarily being a Bible basher and throwing a Bible at people, but always just asking them to continue being curious. Because that was one of the things that filled me up, just to add that people weren't like, when I asked questions, people weren't like, oh, that's a wrong question, or I don't have the answer to that. It was a case of keep asking those questions, be curious, find out what happens.
Yeah, I love that. That's like, there's nothing to add to that really, apart from this is all an organic conversation, like none of it is really scripted, and just your emphasis on curiosity is key, because one of the principles of why the gathering exists in the first place is so that people can feed their curiosity. That small inkling is actually a spark which can start so much other stuff. So the bottom line is, if you're curious, pursue it. Don't run away from it, just like run into it.
100%, that's powerful, man.
Brilliant. So thank you so much for answering these questions and exploring kind of these themes. I suppose my last question for you would be, if you could give your 20-year-old self, or however old self, a bit of life and faith advice, one thing or two things, what would it be?
That's a big one, man. 20-year-old Carl. 20-year-old Carl, very different Carl. One would be to be more curious. I think at that age, I was definitely much more of a let me just go with the flow type of person, especially in terms of my friendship circle, because I was at uni, etc. I've always had my own mind. I was always very focused, but I just asked myself to be a little bit more curious. I know I used to meditate at that time. I still used to pray, but I never used to go to church. But I always used to wonder, what could I add more to my life if I just spend a little bit more time in my faith, if I just spend a little bit more time finding out why people are so adamant on going to church, why people are so faithful. So to be a bit more curious. And the second one is to take more risks, man. Think big and take more risks.
That's amazing. Thank you.
No problem, man. Thank you for having me. It's been epic.